Dan Finke, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, is it Russell or Martin?
Yes. This is. It's one of those. This is Russell. Martin.
Hello, this is Martin over here.
Hi.
I'm the one with the dark brown voice on the left.
So Dan Finke is, I believe, a professional philosopher, right?
Yep, you can say that.
And where are you situated? I should have looked this all up before the show.
That's okay. I'm an adjunct assistant professor at Hofstra University and in the City University of New York CUNY system.
Okay, and Dan blogs at Camels with Hammers, which is at patheos.com/blogs/Camels with Hammers. And I had a fun chat with Dan at the American Atheist Convention earlier this year, and we thought that we'd repeat it, more or less. So you've got a pet cause, which is basically that you think that atheists don't push hard enough for people to agree that that there is an objective source of morality. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I'd say that. I think we can have objective ethics in an atheistic framework, and an atheist should make developing that line of argument more central. They should work out how ethics can be constructively done, because we lose all this sort of well, number one, it's true, I think, that we can have objective ethics, but also we lose all sorts of ground with theists when they think that their only option for ethics is religious.
Why would you say that? I mean, I think I agree with you, but just could you clarify why you think we lose a lot of ground by not arguing for objective morality or ethics?
Well, for one thing, people realize the practical consequences of not being able to say that there's any moral truth. They're concerned with what are you going to teach your kids? How are you going to instill in them a sense that these things are really important and binding, even when the kids don't want to feel that way. Society needs to have norms, and we need confidence in the validity of our norms. And so if you're going to undercut people's sense that they have any kind of validity, then people see that as a threat to social order and a reason not to be an atheist.
Okay. Your sound quality is not great. What kind of phone are you using?
It's a BlackBerry. Well, it's not a BlackBerry. It's a Nokia equivalent.
Okay.
All right, well, then that's the best we can manage.
All right.
I'll just...
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Can I talk? Should I talk louder? Would that help?
No, actually less loud would be better, I think.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think that a lot of atheists not only don't argue for an objective morality, but would actually be turned off by the idea, maybe, because they might say, well, that's just a religious thing, saying absolutely what's right and wrong. What would you say to them?
Well, I mean, that's like saying that there can't be objective science because that would entail absolutism about every scientific opinion. And that's exactly what we fight, right? Religious people who, some of them argue that, well, there can't be, scientists, just because you say there's objective truth, there are better answers in science. Therefore, you're just a bunch of absolutists. And it's no different to say that, to equate objective views and morality with absolutism. There's nothing absolutist about saying that there are better and worse answers that can be arrived at through more rational means rather than less, more objective means rather than less. That can be completely consistent without being an absolutist, and it can also be consistent with having an awareness that sometimes the right thing morally is going to vary with context. Most of the moral realists of our writing today that I read are very aware that morality has to be situationally sensitive to be genuine. And so we buy into a false dichotomy where the only choices are absolutism and relativism. We don't believe that about truth in science. We don't think that it's absolute perfect truth or nothing. And I don't think we should have that sort of boxed on morality. It's counterproductive.
Okay, so when you say objective morality, you don't mean that it's not situational or dependent on context, basically. You just mean that, like, in any particular situation, there is a best answer which could be discovered in principle?
Yeah, that's about right.
One of my real concerns, Dan, about the way in which Christians like to frame the concept of objective morality, it always seems loaded with this assumption that these are concepts human beings simply cannot figure out rationally. And I hear a lot of Christian apologists disdain reason and evidence and things like that as even being sort of epistemically valid. It's ridiculous, I know, but that's a big William Lane Craig thing. And it just seems to be a big kind of intellectual dodge. They try to get around the necessity for rational thought and evidence simply by declaring by fiat that those things are utterly irrelevant to knowledge, and then they can, at that point, make a case for faith. And so I see this as all Christians' approach to objective morality being kind of tied in with a misology, a hatred of, disdain for reason itself. And so how would you suggest would be a good way to, and I think a lot of atheists are conscious of that. There's a whole idea, you just can't figure out that it's bad to kill a guy unless God tells you every single time. You can't work that out by yourself. So now how would you, for an atheist, help to get around that sort of idea, that a notion that we can come up with an objective moral standards or criteria that are rational and that would apply in the general. How do we frame it in such a way so that it's not coming from the same place as Christians are coming from? That's what I'm trying to say.
The first thing I would say, just a quick counter-apologetic point, is that if they were really right, that there were no rational basis, then they have no way to say we should obey a God or not. They have no way to say any kind of rational, if they really don't think it's rational, then they can't make the appeal that then they know that they should just trust God because they can't trust their own reason, because it requires their own, they have to make a judgment it's the right thing to do to go trust God, so they have to have some reason involved, and usually they're being very disingenuous because they're assuming you are invested in morality and that you do know there are good reasons for it, and that's why you're going to be spooked. Right,
yeah, I've always thought that too, because if a religious person says to you, well, there must be a God because then what Hitler did, there would be nothing wrong with it. They're saying that, assuming that you will react in horror at the idea that it could be okay to do what Hitler did, even though they're starting from the position that you're an atheist, and so you shouldn't have that.
Yeah. Now, to answer, though, how we would go about showing that it's rooted in reason, there are a number of things I think are important here. And one of the first things I want to stress is that saying it's objective, I know you guys, like you led with one of the fears people have, they hear the word objective absolute. And I know that that's one of the reasons a lot of atheists are allergic to the term, even if they'll agree with a lot of other things I say. But you see, what I hear in the word objective is we can actually have a discussion that will get somewhere. And what I hear in the word subjective is, you know what, let's not talk because there's no hope. And so what I want to stress is that there are at least degrees of objectivity. Now, you might not agree that all of them work, or you might not agree that all of them can fit together in an overall account. I think I have one, but I can understand if someone doesn't. But there are a number of prongs for objectivity. So for one prong, we have formal consistency. One of the things about our actions is that think about when we realize that a belief is contradictory, and something in us says, well, you just can't believe that. And you say, why? And you say, because it's just false. It's just a contradiction. Or if you were to believe something, you see a fact that refutes something you wanted to believe, and you just can't deny the source. There's a part of you which says you just have to be consistent and accept this. And similarly with actions, we're cognizant that some of our actions are just formally inconsistent. That sometimes when we do something that when we hold ourselves to a different standard than we're expecting everyone else to hold to, that there's an inconsistency there that we're aware is an irrational thing. That if I'm depending on everyone else to cooperate with this system for it to work, for me to be the exception, I know that there's a validity to that principle. Well, what if everyone did that? You know, when someone would say to you, well, what if everyone did that? And you'd realize, okay, yeah, if everyone did that, I couldn't even, you know, skate by, you know, want everybody else's cooperation if everybody cheated like I did. There's an awareness of an inconsistency there. And similar to the way that inconsistency of beliefs leads us to just know that, oh, I just can't be inconsistent as a rational person, similarly an inconsistency in our actions where we expect others to do things that we won't ourselves do leads us to an awareness that, oh, wait, this is an inconsistency. And as a rational person, that bothers us for a good reason.
So, you know, in other words, this is sort of the variant of the golden rule, or I guess Kant's moral imperative, where it's like you should behave in a way that you would be okay with everybody else doing it too.
Yeah, because there's a formal inconsistency, not just because I wouldn't like it, but there's something inherently unfair.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing I would argue is everybody knows, I think intuitively, and I think you can make arguments for this, but we all recognize that there are various human powers, and for any of us, if we could maximize more of them, that would be better for us than to maximize less of them. You know, if we could be more rational, more emotionally in tune with others, and more social, more technologically powerful, more sexually fulfilled and flourishing. You know, if we could maximize ourselves in more varieties of ways, we all recognize that that's a greater realization of ourselves than if we do less. And so we're all working within that basic understanding. For most of us, most of our powers are maximized more when they create power outside of ourselves, when we're creative of something that flourishes beyond ourselves. When we empower others, we're more powerful through them than we would be if we just clamp down on all the power. There's more creativity when we empower others than when we don't. And we all have basic interests and needs for pleasure, etc. So there's a common set of goods that we all understand intuitively. Economists, psychologists, when you read papers, you know, everyone's writing about how do we create happiness, how do we help people fulfill their potential, how do we distribute goods. Everybody knows these sorts of goods, and there's a rational basis for those goods in that our powers are the precondition of our being. If our powers don't exist, we don't exist. And so there's an inherent reason we have to maximize them that we don't need an external source to tell us about.
What would you say to somebody who just said, well, you know, I hear all that, but I just don't care about maximizing other people's happiness? In fact, like, if everybody is just miserable, but it glorifies God, then that's the highest good, for instance.
Well, we are coming from a different place if they're going to assume that there's a God. I mean, in that sort of a case, I would say that it wouldn't be much of a powerful creator if that creator only was able to create beings that were miserable and destroyed, and that functioned badly in their powers. And, you know, if you were to take, you know, if we were to judge any human creator, you know, by what they create when it functions well, they're a good creator. So if this is the best creator, this creator would want us to flourish at our maximum.
Yeah, I mean, and what I'm getting out of this a lot is that, again, taken in a Christian context, Christians' notion of morality quite often involves disdaining, you know, the worldly pleasures, and the idea is to place Christianity and one's Christian beliefs and worship of God, reverence for God, et cetera, at the center of whatever it is that makes you happy in life. So it isn't the things that you do that bring happiness to you. It's through your devotion and worship
right,
to the Lord. You know, it's
how much time you spend in church.
Or not even that. It's just do you walk with Jesus? Is that the walk you take through life? Like every day, it's all tied into the level of devotion to the Christian belief, and it's not even really about personal fulfillment and having and certainly not about things like sexual fulfillment but what you see at the same time are And this, I think, is the core moral hypocrisy of particularly American Christianity, and I think you might even say, Catholicism with the way the Vatican's run, which is that, the pastors say all of this, and the flock dutifully follows it, and they tithe and they pledge and what have you. But these same ministers are living in opulent mansions, and just have 9-figure bank accounts that are tax-free or often some safe haven, and they're certainly enjoying the worldly pleasures. And so it's really kind of a big con, and atheists always love it when one of these guys ends up exposed in the media for being a big fraud, and yet the con still sells. They're still able to sell this moral message of just sacrifice and self-denial and turn your life over to Jesus and even the last to the last dollar that you have, and of course they're living it up in their limos and their hot tubs with their hookers and what have you. And so, when you have that dishonest a moral system that has so much impact on that so many people still follow it and accept it and believe that it's valid, how do you counter that with an actual rationally based concept of secular rational objective morals that someone will buy especially when you work out the notions of heaven and hell and your eternal punishment if you don't toe the line into the sales pitch, right? And so how do we overcome that?
Well, one of the things that Nietzsche does is Nietzsche argues that whole idea that actually being a small and humble person who has nothing and who is nothing and is, Nietzsche challenges that idea as what he calls a strategy of ressentiment. It's a strategy by which somebody can't have excellence and power and all the great things I just described. They console themselves that they're really the better ones because they're so small and inferior, etc. And so there's a large appeal to it where that sort of an ethos tells people who feel small that they're okay being small and they can kind of embrace their smallness. And so I think that there's something to acknowledge about that, where you can say, look, this is useful to people who want to keep you feeling small, but it doesn't make any sense for a God to create you with all these powers just to thwart them. It would be like, could you imagine taking your kid, would you get your kid genetically engineered to have greater intelligence just so you could, force them to never go to school and frustrate them so that they, it doesn't make sense to give you these powers in order to tell you not to flourish in them to their maximum. And everybody knows that intuitively. Now, what I can affirm in them is say, look, I think there's something good going on in those religious beliefs, in that I think what's happening is that because people abuse power, because people, when they look after themselves, they tend to be narcissistic and only selfish, there are moral codes which try and overcorrect in the opposite direction. So they overcorrect about how much you have to be selfless, and they overcorrect because there are ways that morality requires us to, because morality is often the set of rules for curbing ourselves so we're not selfish about our pursuit of power,
right.
but
So
that
you
we're cooperative.
mean like, for instance, Jesus saying, if you would be perfect, then sell all that you have and distribute it all to the poor.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, that kind of thing is, that's a test. But this always drove me nuts because when I was an evangelical Christian teenager, I did believe that ethics wasn't that my sexual abstinence wasn't hurting me. I believed that this was leading me up to this better reward of this perfect marriage, and it would work out in life. I always believed my Christian virtues would lead to a better life. But it was funny when I asked my mom, and I said to her later on, I was a little bit bitter about being raised this way, and I said to her, why did you go to this extreme, why was, teaching me this, like, totally no sex till marriage, kind of like extremism? And she said, well, we just didn't know it would, take it so literally. And I think that a lot of religious people have that attitude, that they kind of know their kids aren't, they kind of know morality is something you're going to fail at, but they want us to aim the bar really high so you'll hit, so when you fail, you'll be closer to good. And I just want to argue to those people that there's no reason we can't teach people a balanced perspective to aim right at the good.
Well, and I think that they concentrate when they talk about moral issues on the most trivial things, right? right?
Yeah.
I mean, they concentrate on, whatever not just a person's sexual habits, but they concentrate on things like Christians that get all bent out of shape if you use swear words, right? Like that's a big moral tell for them. If you're somebody, who drops an F-bomb in a Facebook comment, you're the most immoral person alive. But if you're a racist, a homophobe, a bigot, if you're, all these other, if you vote for politicians who, well, wait, that's all of them. I was going to say politicians who lie and steal. But you know what I mean? It's like there are so many real, serious moral concerns going on in the world, and I see so many religious fundamentalists concentrating on, really small, insignificant things, and perhaps it's because it's easier to knock those down than the really big issues, and pretend to be pious that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things going on. That reminds me, yesterday, a pastor friend of mine put up a picture, and it was Jesus offering fish and loaves, and the people were going, "But is it vegan? That's got gluten in it?" And and then another one, and another one was concerned about some other modern health issue. And I was just, and he was like, "Sigh! Oh, look at these liberals with all these inane concerns." And I'm sitting there thinking, "Wait a minute! You're the guy. You endorse Leviticus with outdated Picayune concerns, right?" But what I would say to that is that there's a couple things going on. One is that I think that those things are more cultural markers than genuine morality issues, and I think that they put a lot of stake in abortion and gay rights, et cetera, because those are key identity markers, and I think that's what accentuates those things.
So in other words, they're just tribal identifiers more than actual fundamental right and wrong issues in some way.
Yeah, because politically they've evolved into what their in and out group membership is about. There was a ridiculous circumstance a year ago where a guy didn't get hired, or he got fired from his job because he got turned down for the job because it was a Christian school, and on his religious views he said that we shouldn't judge people, and the guy and the interviewer took that as a clue he might be gay. Him saying Jesus doesn't want us to judge people was a clue he might be gay. And so, because you see, that's how dug in they are that being accepting of gays is now the marker, and it can be anything random. That's what it's going to be. But the other thing is, when a morality comes to you with this absolutist idea, then you do think you're set, and you don't think through morality in a changing way. And that's why we atheists have to be people who are reasoning about morality and showing that we have constructive viewpoints, and that we can show how you can be constructive and flexible, and make it an evidence-based, responsive kind of endeavor.
Right.
All right. Cool.
So I think we can't take up the whole show with this, although I could easily go on for a lot longer. But if people were going to go to your blog and read one post that would at least get them started on learning more about your objective morality points, what can you think of to point them to? There's a tab at the top of the blog called Morality's Validity.
Okay.
And that's got a bunch of links. And if I had to pick one, it's a long post, but if they read through it, it covers most of the dimensions of my philosophy. It's called In Which I Answer Leo Libresco's Moral Philosophy Concerns, so you don't have to become a Catholic too.
Right. Okay.
Well,
and that's patheos.com/blog/camels with hammers, right?
Yes.
Why don't you email us that particular URL?
We'll put that on our blog.
We'll put that on the Atheist Experience blog, and then people can read more if they like.
Fantastic. And just one quick shout out. The Recovery from Religion Foundation is raising money for their 1-800 hotline.
Okay, we can't.
No,
Screech.
sorry.
Yeah, sorry. We have.
Wanted me to point that out.
No. Sorry, Dan. There's very strict rules at this station about that kind of thing.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah. Again, blog on that. All right.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
That's okay, bud. Thank you.
Thanks for calling, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Have a good night. Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
All right.
No,
bye.
thanks.